She never expected Mercy to transform a monster into her guardian. Once she pried its claws from the dark pit, that very predator became the galaxy's deadliest protector, killing without hesitation for the human who freed it. Kithar Prime's research outpost stood as an angular, committee-designed facility perched on purple plains. The asymmetrical structure gleamed under the lavender light of twin moons, its metal hull reflecting the strange coloration of the surrounding landscape. Designed to catalog Non-Aer uniforma, the harmless xenofauna that populated this particular sector, the station was considered one of the more uneventful postings in the Galactic Science Consortium's extensive network. Dr. Alara Trent preferred it that way. At 30, the human xenobiologist had already earned a reputation among her peers for her empathy and iconoclastic attitude toward bureaucratic protocols. Her colleagues, especially the crystalline-structured Zephian security team, regarded her compassionate instincts with cautious unease. Another requisition for expanded habitat space? Officer Lern, the lead Zephian security officer, held up her tablet with two slender, translucent fingers. His faceted eyes caught the overhead light in fractured patterns. For specimens already thoroughly documented, Alara pushed a strand of dark hair from her eyes and continued adjusting the atmospheric controls on the central habitat chamber. They were cramped. Growing organisms need room. Learn. Growth implies usefulness. These are cataloged. Completed. Science is never completed, Alara replied, tapping commands into the interface. And every living thing deserves dignity, even the boring ones. The word boring hung in the air between them, an ironic descriptor, given that humans themselves were widely viewed as perhaps the most uninteresting species in the galactic community. Lacking the crystalline beauty of Zephians or the six-limbed dexterity of the Carillions, humans were considered unremarkable in nearly every physical aspect. What they did possess, however, was an uncanny drive to rescue any living being in distress, a trait that the consortium's risk algorithms had flagged repeatedly as a potential liability. Alara's rescue compulsion was noted in her personnel file, marked with a cautionary tag. Exhibit standard human attachment behaviors toward harmless specimens. Tendency requires monitoring, but remains within acceptable parameters. The subtle subtext was clear. Humans frequently adopted harmless creatures, but never apex predators. That would be unthinkable. The morning air recyclers had just completed their daily purification cycle when the emergency channel crackled to life. Alara was cataloging cellular samples from a local arthropod species when the transmission cut through the laboratory's quiet hum. Base, this is Mining Survey Team Epsilon. We have a situation. Requesting immediate xenobiological consult. 17 kilometers from the station, northwestern quadrant. Alara tapped her comm badge. This is Dr. Trent. Nature of the situation? A pause. The transmission hissed with static before clearing. We've discovered a specimen in a collapsed excavation pit. Large, six-limbed, predatory, by all appearances. Behind her, Lern had already pulled up the mining team's coordinates on the main display. No record of apex predators in that sector, he stated flatly, or anywhere on Kithar Prime. It's wounded, the voice continued. Heavy bleeding, respiratory distress evident. Alara was already reaching for her field kit, but Lern's crystalline hand caught her wrist. Standard protocol, he said, voice taking on the familiar, bureaucratic chill she'd come to expect. Leave it. Call for extermination squads. It's bleeding out, Alara countered, pulling free. If we don't intervene, it dies. That is the preferable outcome for an unclassified apex predator. Alara slung her kit over her shoulder, expression hardening. I don't recall let it die being part of our scientific mandate. Our mandate is to catalog harmless species, not rescue lethal ones. Our mandate is to understand life, Alara snapped, the last pretense of consensus evaporating between them.
And I can't understand what I've let die in a hole.
She was already striding toward the transport bay, mind calculating what medical supplies she might need. Something in her refused to accept the cold calculus Learn proposed, especially when the creature might be intelligent. Apex predators often exhibited the highest cognitive functions on any given world.
I'll prep a hover scout,
she called over her shoulder.
2 security officers, standard protocol. We leave in 10 minutes.
Learn's faceted eyes caught the light as he tilted his head. This is exactly the behavior your species profile warns of, Dr. Trent. Good thing you're coming along to keep me from adopting it. Then, the hover scout skimmed over jagged rock formations, its engines humming against the thin atmosphere of Kithar Prime. Beside Alara, 2 Zephian security officers, Learn and his deputy. Vex maintained a rigid silence broken only by occasional reminders of protocol. Containment protocols dictate minimal engagement. Learn repeated for the 3rd time as they approached the coordinates. Observation only. If retrieval is attempted, station command must authorize.
I've already calmed the administrator,
Alara replied, eyes on her tablet as she formulated a sedative mixture. With minimal data on the creature's biology, she was working largely on educated guesses, cross-referencing what little they knew of similar apex species from neighboring systems. He's given conditional approval. Conditional on what? Vex asked, adjusting his pulse rifle.
On you 2 preventing me from getting eaten,
Alara said with a tight smile.
The mining pit came into view, a rough-hewn gash in the purple soil, debris scattered around its edges where the walls had partially collapsed.
Mining equipment lay abandoned. The survey team had retreated to a safe distance, their own small transport visible on a nearby ridge. Alara's breath caught as they circled above the pit. The creature was massive, easily 8 feet tall if standing upright, with 6 powerful limbs ending in vicious claws. Its hide was a mottled gray-black, scarred in numerous places, suggesting a long history of combat. But what struck Alara most were its eyes, ink black and reflective, tracking the hover scout's movement with wary intelligence. Cross-referencing galactic xenofauna database, Vex murmured, scanning with his handheld device. After a moment, it chimed. Classified, Voric apex predator, native to the Outer Rim, critically dangerous.
Never recorded on this planet,
Learn added, expression grim. Those claws can rip through containment plating, Vex observed, as they circled lower. Look how it's watching us, calculating. Alara studied the creature, Vorak, according to their database. It was clearly injured, a deep gash across one flank, seeping dark fluid into the dirt. Its breathing was labored, chest heaving with each inhalation. Despite its wounded state, there was nothing pitiful in its posture. It watched them with the cold calculation of a predator assessing threats. It's injured, weakened, possibly terrified, Alara argued as they set the hover scout down at a safe distance. With medical aid, we stand to learn enormously.
It's a kill-on-sight scenario,
Learn countered sharply.
Our protocols mandate termination.
Alara shook her head. Determination, setting her jaw. We're scientists, not executioners. That creature didn't get here naturally. Someone brought it. Probably the same mining corporation that accidentally breached quarantine protocols last quarter.
Speculation,
Learn dismissed. Common sense, Alara retorted. And reason enough to study it before making any permanent decisions. Without waiting for further argument, she began unloading equipment from the scout's storage compartment. Medical scanners, sedatives, and a collapsible pulley system designed for geological samples. The Vorak tracked her movements, its massive head turning slightly as she worked.
I need one of you to help me set up this pulley system,
she said, her tone making it clear she wouldn't take no for an answer.
The other should prepare the sedative rifle.
Vex and Learn exchanged looks, a subtle crystalline shimmer passing between them, that Alara recognized as their species equivalent of an exasperated sigh. "I'll secure the harness," Vex finally volunteered. "Learn has better aim with the dart gun." For the next hour, they worked in tense silence. The pulley system was anchored to the hover scout and extended over the pit's edge. Alara carefully measured the sedative dose, triple-checking her calculations. "This should be enough to sedate it without causing respiratory failure," she explained, loading the dart. "But we need to get close enough for a clean shot." The approach to the pit's edge was a masterclass in controlled terror. Alara moved slowly, deliberately, keeping her voice calm as she addressed the wounded predator. "We're going to help you," she said softly, knowing full well the creature couldn't understand her words. But tone and body language transcended species barriers, and she kept hers deliberate and non-threatening. The Vorax snarled, a rumbling sound that vibrated through the rocky ground. Its claws dug into the dirt as it tried to stand, only to collapse again with a pained hiss. Learn raised the dart gun, sighting along its barrel. "Clear shot," he whispered. "Wait," Alara murmured. She reached into her pocket, extracting a ration of nutrient paste, standard emergency supplies. Slowly, she tossed it down into the pit, where it landed a few feet from the Vorak. The creature eyed the offering suspiciously, nostrils flaring as it caught the scent. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then, instinct overrode caution, and it stretched one massive limb toward the food. "Now," Alara breathed. The dart struck true, embedding in the creature's flank. The reaction was immediate and violent. The Vorak roared, a sound so primal it sent birds scattering from distant trees. It thrashed, claws raking the earth, eyes wild with rage and fear. For 30 terrifying seconds, Alara wondered if her calculations had been wrong, if the sedative was too weak or, worse, lethal. Then, gradually, the Vorak's movement slowed. Its massive limbs grew heavy, and finally, it slumped to the ground, eyes still open but glazed. "It worked!" Alara exhaled, relief flooding her system. "Quickly! We need to get the harness on it before it metabolizes the sedative." The extraction was a harrowing, 6-hour ordeal. Rockfalls threatened to bury them all. The earth shifted treacherously as they worked. The Vorak, even sedated, was extraordinarily heavy, and maneuvering the harness around its form required Vex to descend into the pit, a task he performed with obvious reluctance. Alara's heart raced with every twitch of the creature's massive paws. Even unconscious, it radiated lethal potential. The Zephians exchanged exasperated looks throughout the process. "We're risking station security for one animal." Alara's only answer was steel-edged resolve as she monitored the creature's vital signs, administering additional sedative when necessary. By the time they hoisted the Vorak into the reinforced hover cradle they'd hastily constructed, the twin sons of Kithar Prime were low on the horizon. "I'm naming him Kale," Alara announced as they secured the final restraints. "You're naming an apex predator?" Learn's voice held disbelief. "Every research subject needs a designation," Alara replied calmly. "Kyle means survivor in Old Earth dialect." As the hover scout lifted off, carrying its dangerous cargo back toward the research station, Alara couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just altered the course of her career, and perhaps much more, irrevocably. Back at the station, Kale awakened in a modified biolab stall, originally intended for docile specimens, reinforced with additional plating and energy fields. It was still barely adequate for containing a creature of his size and strength. Cameras recorded his every movement as he regained consciousness, documenting behavior that immediately struck the observation team as anomalous. Kale's eyes, ink-black, reflective pools, scanned the surroundings with strategic precision. He nosed the locked door, studied the fastening mechanism, and ran one claw along the seam where door met frame. His movements weren't the random explorations of a confused animal, but the methodical assessment of a prisoner seeking weakness. Most apex predators hunt by instinct. Dr. Ren Vesser, a Zephian xenopsychologist who'd been called in to observe, noted. He stood beside Alara, watching the monitors. This one appears to analyze, assessing containment weaknesses. Intelligence testing puts Vorak above 90% of cataloged species, Alara replied. But this one seems even more adaptive than the baseline. Which makes it exponentially more dangerous, Ren countered. You realize the risk you've introduced to this station? If it escapes... He won't escape, Alara interjected. And we can learn so much from him. How often do we get to study an apex predator this closely? There are reasons we don't, Ren said dryly. Alara approached the corridor, leading to Kale's containment area, carrying a container of water. Through the reinforced observation window, she could see the massive creature pacing, 6 limbs moving in a hypnotic, predatory rhythm. As she entered the outer corridor, Kyle's head snapped up, nostrils flaring. What happened next astonished the observation team. Kale's aggressive posture, hunched shoulders, extended claws, lowered head, relaxed almost immediately. His clenched claws loosened, and he moved toward the barrier, meeting Alara's gaze with what could only be described as recognition. I saved you, Kale, Alara whispered, knowing he couldn't understand her words but hoping her tone conveyed meaning. I won't let you die. Something passed between them in that moment, a silent understanding that transcended species barriers. Kale settled onto his haunches, watching as Alara placed the water container in the transfer chamber, where it could be moved into his enclosure remotely. Word spread quickly throughout the station. Humanian infiltrated by apex predator. Technicians swapped whispered fears. The station commander issued a low-level security alert, but Alara was too absorbed in her observations to pay much attention to the growing unease. Each day revealed new facets of Kale's intelligence. He learned the feeding schedule within hours, positioning himself expectantly before the delivery system activated. He distinguished between different staff members, showing particular awareness of Alara's presence even when she wasn't visible, turning toward the door moments before she entered, as if recognizing her footsteps or scent. Most remarkably, he began to exhibit what Alara could only classify as social awareness. When she approached his enclosure, he would curl at the cell's edge nearest to her. When another researcher moved too quickly or carried unfamiliar equipment, Kale would snarl, but never strike, even when the barrier between them was temporarily lowered for cleaning. He's making choices, Alara explained to Ren during their weekly assessment, not just reacting on instinct. Or he's calculating, Ren countered, waiting for an opportunity. But Alara's detailed logs painted a different picture, one of a presumed mindless killer developing rudimentary social bonds. Her recordings captured subtle shifts in Kale's body language when she spoke to him, suggesting he was attuning to her emotional state, if not her actual words. As weeks passed, Alara's investigation into how Kale had arrived on Kithar Prime led her down increasingly disturbing paths. Shipping manifests revealed discrepancies. Security logs showed unexplained access to restricted areas. Eventually, the evidence pointed to a clear conclusion: illegal wildlife trafficking. A mining corporation's off-planet arms dealer had likely imported Kale as a weapon test bed. Armed with her findings, Alara confronted the station administrator, Sarek Malos, in his sterile office overlooking the research complex. They shipped an apex predator here, bypassing quarantine, she said, placing her tablet on his desk. If this gets out, we'll lose funding. Malos, a thin, perpetually anxious bureaucrat, scanned her data with growing dismay. This is highly speculative, Dr. Trent. It's the only explanation that fits the evidence. Kale didn't teleport here. Malos steepled his fingers, expression calculating. Shut it down, he said finally. Log it as an anomaly. We can't afford scandal. Shut what down? The investigation? The specimen? Dispose of it. File the incident as a containment risk that was neutralized. Alara stared at him, incredulous. You want to euthanize an intelligent creature to cover up corporate malfeasance? I want to protect this station's reputation and funding, Malos countered smoothly. The creature is dangerous, illegal, and a continuing drain on resources. He's also evidence, Alara pointed out, not to mention a research subject of incredible value. Evidence that would be contested, discredited, and ultimately dismissed. Malos sighed. Be reasonable, Dr. Trent. This isn't a battle worth fighting. Alara left the meeting seething. Her resolve only strengthened. If the administration wouldn't support her, she would continue her research independently, documenting everything. Kyle deserved that much, and so did scientific truth. The tension with her Zephian colleagues continued to mount. Dr. Renvesser cornered her in the laboratory one evening, his crystalline features catching the light in sharp angles. Prolonged exposure to the Vorak endangers everyone, he warned. He doesn't eat your research assistants, but give him a reason, and his claws deliver death. This isn't a pet. They're programmed killers. We're learning his language, his patterns, Alara countered. He's not a programmed killer. He's making choices. Choices to tolerate you, for now, Ren insisted. But what happens when you misread his language? When you mistake a hunting crouch for affection? The question lodged in Alara's mind, feeding her own doubts. She had saved Kale, but in doing so, had she made herself an unwitting custodian of a lethal organism? Could she truly control him? Or was she merely deluding herself that their bond meant anything to a creature evolved for killing? Her internal conflict was interrupted by more immediate concerns, when the station's external sensors detected a Carillion pirate ship loitering at orbital distance. Intelligence logs identified it as belonging to a notorious crew specialized in acquiring exotic bioweapons for the black market. If they traced Kale's location, catastrophe would likely follow. The warning came too late. Under cover of local dust storms that periodically swept Kithar Prime's surface, a Carillion pirate boarding party breached the station's lower docking bay. Their objective was clear: locate any exotic lifeforms, capture them, and escape before galactic security forces could respond. What they couldn't have anticipated was that the station's automated defenses would fail completely. A sabotage within the communications relay, likely orchestrated by the same traffickers who had brought Kale to the planet, delayed alarms and lockdown protocols. The Zephian security team scrambled to seal bulkheads, but the intruders stormed through corridors faster than expected. Alara was conducting late-night behavioral tests on Kale in the biolab when the override siren finally blared. Biolab doors slammed shut, an automatic lockdown procedure, trapping her in the observation area adjacent to Kale's enclosure. Cut off from the main command center, she had only patchy communications and the biolab's independent security feed. What she saw chilled her blood. Pirates moving methodically through the station, disabling security personnel and heading directly for the xenobiology wing. They knew exactly what they were looking for. Kale sensed the change immediately. His massive form tensed, nostrils flaring as he caught unfamiliar scents in the recycled air. He began pacing, each movement coiled with lethal potential. When the pirates reached the biolab's reinforced door, they deployed a molecular destabilizer, illegal technology that temporarily weakened the door's atomic bonds. As the barrier shimmered and failed, the lead pirate stepped through, weapon raised. His first and last mistake was ignoring Kale in favor of targeting Alara. Within 4 seconds, Kale had rended the pirate's armor in half. The station's seismic sensors recorded the inhuman screams as the creature's claws crushed bone and severed tendons. The remaining pirates attempted to retreat, firing wildly into the lab, but Kale was already moving, a blur of primal fury, emerging from vents and side corridors that should have been inaccessible to a creature his size. He anticipated their movements with uncanny spatial reasoning, cutting off escape routes and isolating targets. The battle that followed lasted 23 minutes by the station's chronometers. Alara, sheltered in the observation room, watched in horror and awe as Kale executed what could only be described as tactical warfare. He used the station's artificial gravity modulators, briefly reversing gravity in one corridor, sending two pirates careening into the ceiling before they could draw weapons. He isolated heavy weapon specialists by luring them into a maintenance shaft, sealing it from the outside, and using crushing hydraulics to neutralize them entirely. Station alarms blared continually, mingling with the screams of dying pirates and the deeper, more primal roars of Kale as he moved through the complex with terrible purpose. The final confrontation occurred in the central atrium, where Kale cornered the last two pirates. Alara, having navigated through emergency access tunnels, watched from a secure observation window. "Kyle, stand down!" she called out, unsure if he could hear her through the barrier, uncertain if he would obey even if he could. The lead pirate, a tall Carillion female with chitinous armor, fired wildly at the approaching predator. Kyle sidesteps with fluid grace, vaulting over her position to land behind. In one swift motion, he tore a bulkhead panel free and brought it down with crushing force, pinning the pirate beneath it, killing her instantly. The final pirate threw down his weapon, hands raised in surrender. Kale paused, massive head tilted as if considering this new development. His claws remained extended, blood from previous kills still dripping from their points. Using emergency override codes, Alara unlocked the observation room door and stepped into the atrium. The remaining pirate's eyes widened in terror, darting between her and the blood-soaked predator. "He's not going to let me live," the pirate said, voice trembling. "That depends," Alara replied coolly, "on whether you make any sudden moves." She approached Kale slowly, ignoring the devastation surrounding them. Medical supplies from her emergency kit were clutched in one hand, not for the pirates, but for Kale. Despite his overwhelming victory, he had sustained injuries, a plasma burn across one flank, a deep gash where a blade had caught him. "You defended me," she said softly, kneeling beside the massive creature. "My station," without hesitation. Kale's senses focused entirely on her, his black eyes reflecting her image, rather than attacking. He nudged her shoulder with a gentleness that belied the fury he had just unleashed. The gesture cemented their bond, predator and human as inseparable guardians of one another. 4 hours later, a Galactic Security Force cruiser dropped through the atmosphere, responding to the station's belated distress call. Boarding teams in armored exosuits surveyed the scene with professional horror. The lower station corridors littered with pirate corpses and scorch marks, internal structural damage registering as worst-case scenario on security logs. When they reached the biolab's observation window, they found Alara calmly reviewing her research tablet, while Kale stood sentinel, his hulking form blocking the entry path, wounds bandaged with surprising precision. Commander Rose Velen, a veteran xenopsychologist and lead investigator for the security force, approached the barrier cautiously. "Dr. Trent," he began, voice carefully neutral. "Are you injured?" "No," Alara replied, without looking up from her tablet. "Kyle handled everything." She glanced around at the destroyed laboratory equipment. "Lab equipment, not so much." Velen's gaze shifted to Kale, and he visibly stiffened. "You refer to that apex predator as a research partner?" "Partner. Protector. The semantics are flexible." Alara finally met his gaze. "But yes, we've developed a working relationship." What followed was a debriefing unlike any in the security force's records. Alara outlined the entire sequence of events: the rescue, the developing bond, the symbiotic relationship that had culminated in Kale's devastating defense of the station. She cited galactic self-defense protocols, arguing that Kale's actions fell under defense of civilian assets by non-sapient entities. He acted to protect station personnel, she concluded, within the legal framework established by the consortium's own policies. Legal precedent doesn't account for apex predators acting as security assets, Velan countered, his expression troubled. Perhaps it should, Alara replied simply. A tense standoff ensued when security personnel attempted to separate Kale from Alara for standard containment protocols. The moment they approached with restraint equipment, Kale's posture shifted, shoulders hunching, claws extending, a low growl rumbling through the observation chamber. The structural stress sensors registered alarming readings as Kale's muscles tensed for action. I wouldn't, Alara warned calmly. He's very particular about who handles his medical care. Velan, assessing the situation with the caution of experience, ordered his team to stand down. We'll need to negotiate terms, he conceded reluctantly. This situation is unprecedented. In the days that followed, Alara's detailed logs became classified references for how human empathy could effectively weaponize apex predators. Security forces quietly adjusted training manuals, adding sections on human apex symbiosis and appropriate containment measures. The station's governing board debated extensively whether to decommission the entire facility or continue Kale's study under enhanced security. Alara argued passionately that Kale's intelligence merited further research, and that separating them now would likely result in more casualties. He's bonded to me, she explained during one particularly heated session. Remove me, and his behavior becomes unpredictable. Keep us together, and you have the opportunity to study a unique interspecies relationship that could revolutionize our understanding of cognition. Rumors inevitably leaked beyond the station's confines. Human xenobiologist tames and harnesses apex predator as ultimate security asset. Campus debates ignited across academic enclaves, some hailing Alara as a visionary, others decrying her recklessness. Throughout it all, Alara grappled with her own conflicted emotions. Lives had been lost, violently, brutally, because of her decision to rescue Kale. Yet, she couldn't deny the awe she felt at what their bond had accomplished. She committed herself to a new mission, studying Kale's social cognition to produce guidelines that might prevent misuse of similar relationships in the future. Kale, for his part, demonstrated clear recognition of Alara's voice and presence. He remained on guard around unfamiliar personnel, but no longer attacked unprovoked, implying a nascent moral code developing within his predatory instincts. After weeks of deliberation, the Galactic Science Consortium finally rendered its verdict. Kale would be officially designated a research asset under human guardianship. A special classification code was appended to his file, HS Apex Unit. Alara was cleared of legal wrongdoing, though her station's budget was slashed for excessive collateral damage during containment breach. Academic and military communities took immediate notice. Alara co-authored 2 landmark papers, one on human Vorak bonding, another on apex predator social cognition. Military strategists began re-examining defensive protocols, contemplating whether empathic recruitment of apex predators could supplant expensive automated turrets. Word reached frontier mining colonies. Vorak squads paired with empathetic humans. The new frontier security. Insurance premiums for off-world mining spiked accordingly. No one wanted to be the test case for whether all Vorak could be reliably bonded, or if Kale was a singular exception. Kithar Prime Research Outpost gained a new reputation. The galaxy's most secure and unpredictable installation, staffed by researchers who freely spoke of Kale's patrol routes and Alara's midnight behavioral trials. Applications to work at the facility simultaneously plummeted and soared, depending on whether applicants found the idea of working alongside an apex predator terrifying or exhilarating. 6 months after the pirate incident, Alara stood in the observation chamber, watching Kale pace his now expanded enclosure. His massive form moved with fluid grace, tail lashing, nostrils flared at distant station sounds. They had developed a routine: morning cognitive tests, midday exercise in the reinforced external yard, evening sessions where Alara would read aloud from scientific journals, a practice that seemed to calm him, regardless of content. "I saved him from a collapsing pit," she mused to herself, making notes on her tablet. "He saved us from death. Now, we stand on the brink of something neither of us fully understands." She watched as Kale paused in his pacing, head tilting, as if sensing her attention. "But as long as we face the galaxy together, I'm no longer afraid." A transmission alert pinged on her tablet. Suspicious trafficking vessel detected in Sector 7G. Alara exhaled slowly, considering the implications. After a moment, she tapped her communicator. "Kale," she said simply, "suit up." The response was immediate. Kale moved to the preparation chamber, where specially designed armor awaited fitting. As Alara watched him position himself for the automated system to attach the protective plates, she wondered briefly what they were becoming together: researcher and subject, partners, or something the galaxy had never seen before and might not be ready to accept. Whatever lay ahead, she knew one certainty: the predator she had saved from death had transformed into something unprecedented, a guardian bound by choice rather than instinct, protecting the human who had shown mercy when none was expected. The universe would have to adapt to this new reality, just as she and Kale had adapted to each other. Alara Trent's quiet morning routine was shattered by an incoming priority transmission. 3 months had passed since the incident with the trafficking vessel in Sector 7G, a relatively minor engagement compared to the pirate attack, but one that had further cemented Kale's reputation throughout the quadrant. The lab had settled into an uneasy normalcy, with most staff having either acclimated to Kale's presence or transferred to less exotic postings. "Dr. Trent," Administrator Malice's voice crackled through her comm unit, tension evident even through the static. "My office, immediately." Alara sighed, setting aside her morning tea. "Another budget hearing?" "Consortium representatives. They've come in person." That was unusual enough to quicken her pace. The Galactic Science Consortium rarely dispatched physical representatives to remote outposts, preferring the efficiency of holographic communications for all but the most sensitive matters. "Kyle, stay," she instructed, watching as the massive predator settled onto his haunches in the observation chamber. "Behavioral diagnostics at 1100 hours." His black eyes tracked her movement. A low rumble, what she had come to recognize as acknowledgement, vibrating from his chest. In recent weeks, she'd begun a rudimentary signaling system with him, combining vocal commands with specific gestures. His comprehension had exceeded all projected learning curves. Administrator Malice's office buzzed with nervous energy when she arrived. 2 consortium officials, 1 human, 1 Zephian, sat across from Malice's desk, their formal attire marking them as high-ranking bureaucrats. The human, a silver-haired woman with sharp eyes, studied Alara with unnerving intensity. "Dr. Alara Trent," the woman began without preamble. "I'm Director Vasha Karvanen, Special Projects Division. This is Inspector Neer." She nodded toward her Zephian colleague. "Special Projects?" Alara echoed, taking the offered seat. "I wasn't aware our research warranted that classification." "It didn't," Karvanen replied coolly, "until you transformed an apex predator into a weapon. Kyle is a research subject, not a weapon. A research subject that eliminated 17 armed pirates with tactical precision." Karvanen's tablet projected a holographic display, security footage from the incident, showing Kale moving through the station with lethal efficiency. "This isn't standard predator behavior, Dr. Trent." Alara watched the footage, keeping her expression neutral despite the twist in her stomach. Seeing Kale's rampage from an external perspective was disturbing. She'd been so focused on their bond, on his protection of her, that she'd almost normalized his capacity for violence. "Vorak are highly intelligent," she replied carefully. Kale adapted to the threat. "Precisely our interest," Inspector Neer interjected, his crystalline voice catching the light. "The adaptation, the bond. Your empathic connection appears to have created something unprecedented." "Created a potential security risk," Administrator Malos added, his perpetual anxiety manifesting in tapping fingers. Director Karvanen silenced him with a glance. "Or an opportunity. The Consortium's Military Applications Committee has expressed interest in your research. Dr. Trent, specifically, whether your methods could be replicated." Alara felt a chill run through her. "You want to create more Kales? We want to understand the parameters of human-Vorak bonding. Whether this was a singular phenomenon or something that could be systematically developed." "He's not a prototype," Alara said firmly. "And I'm not a weapons designer." "No," Karvanen agreed. "You're a scientist who has inadvertently made a breakthrough with significant defensive applications. The frontier colonies lose thousands of lives annually to pirate raids. Imagine the deterrent effect of even a small number of bonded Vorak units." The terminology, units rather than individuals, wasn't lost on Alara. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A new research initiative, expanded facilities, resources to conduct controlled bonding experiments with other Vorak specimens, and selected human handlers." "You're talking about intentionally capturing apex predators for military purposes," Alara said slowly. "The ethical implications alone would be thoroughly reviewed by an independent committee," Karvanen interrupted smoothly. "This wouldn't be exploitation, Dr. Trent. It would be a controlled expansion of your existing research, with full consortium oversight." Alara's mind raced. The prospect of expanded research was undeniably tempting. Access to more Vorak specimens, larger facilities, proper funding. But the military angle troubled her deeply. Would Kale become merely the first in a line of weaponized predators? Would the bond she'd developed be reduced to a training manual? "I need time to consider this," she said finally. "Of course," Karvanen replied, though her tone suggested she'd already anticipated Alara's acceptance. "The full proposal has been transferred to your secure account. We'll expect your response within the week." As Alara rose to leave, Inspector Neer added, "We would naturally wish to conduct our own examination of your specimen. Standard baseline readings for comparison purposes." "Kyle," Alara corrected automatically. "His name is Kyle, and any examination would need to be conducted with my supervision." "Of course," Neer agreed, though his faceted eyes revealed nothing of his true thoughts. Returning to the lab, Alara found Kale exactly where she'd left him, though his posture had shifted to alert watchfulness the moment she entered. He sensed her troubled mood immediately, head tilting in what she'd come to recognize as a questioning gesture. "Politics," she explained, knowing he couldn't understand the words but finding comfort in speaking them aloud. "They want to use you as a template, Kyle. Create more partnerships like ours." She approached the observation window, placing her hand against the transparent barrier. "But I'm not sure they understand what we have isn't replicable through protocols and procedures." Kale moved to the window, one massive paw rising to rest against the barrier opposite her hand. The gesture, almost tender in its precision, contrasted sharply with the holographic images of carnage she'd just witnessed. What would happen, she wondered aloud, if they paired humans and Vorak without genuine bonds? Without choice on both sides? The answer seemed obvious. Disaster. What made her connection with Kale work wasn't just procedure or circumstance. It was the genuine choice she'd made to save him, and his subsequent choice to protect rather than harm her. Could such a thing be manufactured on demand? The week that followed was filled with intensive research. Alara pulled every available study on bonding behaviors across species, poring over neurochemical analyses and evolutionary psychology papers. She consulted with Dr. Renvesser, whose initial skepticism had gradually evolved into cautious, scientific curiosity. "The consortium's proposal is ambitious," Wren observed as they reviewed the detailed plans, "but fundamentally flawed in its understanding of bond formation." "Exactly," Alara agreed. "They're approaching this as a training protocol, not a relationship. Most concerning is the accelerated timeline. 6 weeks from capture to deployment? Even domestic animal bonding requires longer." Alara nodded, making additional notes. "They're treating the empathic connection as a technique to be mastered, not an emergent property of mutual trust." Their discussion was interrupted by the lab's security alert. A soft chime indicating authorized visitors had entered the outer chamber. On the monitors, Alara saw Director Karvanen and Inspector Neer being escorted by 2 security officers. "They're early," she murmured, hastily organizing her notes. "The examination wasn't scheduled until tomorrow." "Administrative prerogative," Wren replied with the resigned tone of someone familiar with bureaucratic overreach. When they reached the main laboratory, Director Karvanen was already reviewing the monitoring equipment with obvious interest. "Impressive setup. Dr. Trent, your adaptation of standard containment protocols shows considerable ingenuity." "Necessity drives innovation," Alara replied neutrally. "Standard protocols weren't designed for Kale's capabilities." "Speaking of which," Karvanen gestured toward the observation chamber, where Kale had positioned himself with a clear view of the newcomers. "Your specimen seems particularly alert today." "He's sensitive to unfamiliar presence," Alara explained, moving to the communication panel. "Kyle, status green. Authorized visitors." The predator's posture relaxed marginally, though his gaze remained fixed on the consortium officials with unmistakable assessment. "Remarkable response to verbal cues," Inspector Neer noted, recording observations on his device. "Is he conditioned to specific command phrases?" "It's not conditioning in the traditional sense," Alara corrected. "More like established patterns of communication. He associates certain tones and phrases with safety or threat." "And you'd classify the current relationship status as handler and subject, partner and protector?" Karvanen pressed, watching Kale's reactions closely. "I'd classify it as evolving," Alara replied carefully. "Our understanding of interspecies bonds in this context is still developing." The examination proceeded with clinical precision. Neer deployed a series of scanning devices designed to measure Kale's neurological responses, while Karvanen observed the interaction between Alara and the predator. They conducted basic intelligence tests, spatial reasoning puzzles, reaction time measurements, environmental adaptation scenarios, all carefully documented. Throughout the process, Alara maintained a constant, low-level communication with Kale, explaining each procedure before it happened. His cooperation was remarkable, and noticeably contingent on her presence. "Try the final assessment without Dr. Trent in the room," Karvanen instructed one of the technicians as they prepared a complex problem-solving scenario. "I wouldn't recommend that," Alara cautioned. "He's more cooperative when—" "Precisely what we need to measure," Karvanen interrupted. "The dependency factor in the bond. Dr. Trent, please step into the adjacent room for this trial." Reluctantly, Alara complied, but not before giving Kale a reassuring gesture, a subtle hand signal they'd developed meaning temporary absence. As she exited, she noticed his posture shifting again, muscles tensing beneath his scarred hide. From the monitoring room, she watched as the technicians attempted to engage Kale with the problem-solving apparatus, a complex mechanism that would release food rewards when manipulated correctly. Under Alara's guidance, he had mastered similar devices with impressive speed. Now, however, he simply stared at the technicians, ignoring the apparatus entirely. After several minutes of failed coaxing, he turned his back on the device and settled into a corner of the chamber, eyes fixed on the door through which Alara had exited. "Interesting," Karvanen murmured, making notes. "He's refusing participation without your presence. Not aggression, but passive resistance. He's making a choice," Alara pointed out. "Demonstrating agency or demonstrating dependency," Nier countered. "A concerning variable if we're considering deployment scenarios where handlers might be temporarily separated from their assigned Vorak." The word assigned grated on Alara, reinforcing her growing unease with the entire project. When she returned to the main lab, Kyle immediately approached the observation window, a low rumble of what she'd come to interpret as satisfaction vibrating from his chest. "I believe we have sufficient baseline data," Karvanen announced, reviewing the compiled results. "Your report was impressively thorough, Dr. Trent. But seeing the bond dynamics firsthand has been invaluable. The Military Applications Committee will be particularly interested in the dependency aspects." "I haven't agreed to participate in the expanded program," Alara reminded her. "Of course," Karvanen acknowledged with a thin smile. "But your expertise will be valuable regardless of your direct involvement. The consortium is prepared to move forward with the initiative based on existing data." The implication was clear. With or without Alara's cooperation, the program would proceed. The knowledge she'd gathered, the bond she'd formed with Kale, all would be analyzed, distilled, and replicated in service of creating what the consortium euphemistically termed enhanced security assets. After the officials departed, Alara sat alone in the observation room, watching Kale systematically dismantle the problem-solving apparatus he had earlier ignored. His claws worked with surprising dexterity, separating components with what appeared to be methodical curiosity rather than destructive intent. "They're going to try to make more of you," she told him softly. "Pair humans with Vorak, create bonds through protocol rather than genuine connection." She sighed, pressing her forehead against the cool surface of the observation window. "And I don't know if I can stop them." Kale paused in his examination of the device, black eyes fixing on her with unnerving intensity. Sometimes, in moments like these, she could almost convince herself he understood not just her tone, but her actual words, that some deeper comprehension existed between them than science could currently measure. Her comm unit chimed, a message from Dr. Renvesser requesting an urgent meeting in the secure archives. Unusual timing, but perhaps he'd found something relevant to their earlier discussion. "I'll be back soon," she promised Kale, who had resumed his methodical disassembly of the apparatus. The secure archives were located in the station's lower levels, a climate-controlled repository for physical specimens and sensitive documentation that couldn't be trusted to digital storage. When Alara arrived, she found Ren already accessing one of the older terminal systems, his crystalline fingers moving with unusual urgency. "What's so important it couldn't wait until morning?" she asked, glancing at the ancient computer system he was operating. "This," Ren replied, stepping back to reveal the screen. "Historical data on the first documented human-Vorak interaction, classified under Consortium Directive 37B. Alara leaned forward, scanning the documents with growing astonishment. "This is from almost 50 years ago, the Teresh mining colony incident." "Yes. Officially recorded as a catastrophic containment failure, resulting in 17 casualties." Ren's voice lowered. "But these original field reports tell a different story. The records detailed an eerily familiar scenario, a mining operation on a frontier world, the discovery of a wounded Vorak, a human xenobiologist who advocated for medical intervention rather than euthanasia. But where Alara's story had led to a protective bond, the Teresh incident had ended in bloodshed. "They tried to force the bond," Alara murmured, reading the clinical descriptions of accelerated integration protocols and compliance inducement. They tried to weaponize empathy, Ren corrected grimly, using psychological conditioning on both the human handler and the Vorak. The result was unpredictable. The final report described how the Vorak had appeared to form an attachment to its assigned handler, following commands and demonstrating protective behaviors. But when separated from the handler during a routine examination, it had systematically eliminated everyone in the facility, including, eventually, the handler himself. The consortium classified the incident as a simple containment breach, Ren explained. But internally, they've been studying the failure points for decades. Your success with Kale represents the breakthrough they've been waiting for. They're going to repeat the same mistakes, Alara realized, cold dread settling in her stomach. But with better data this time, they think they can engineer what happened naturally between Kale and me. Precisely, and based on historical precedent, the results could be catastrophic. Alara straightened, a new resolve forming. We need to present this to Director Karvanen. Show them why forced bonding won't work. They already know, Ren said quietly. These records are in their classified archives. They've simply calculated that the potential military application is worth the risk of failure. Then we need a different approach. Alara paced the small archive room, mind racing. If we can't stop the program, we need to ensure it's done right, with genuine bonding, not forced compliance. You're considering accepting their offer, Ren observed, faceted eyes catching the dim light. On my terms, Alara clarified, with protocols that prioritize natural bond formation over accelerated timelines, and with Kale and me as the template for a genuine partnership, not a weapon deployment. As they continued discussing strategy, neither noticed the small, blinking light on the archive's security panel, indicating that their supposedly private conversation was being monitored on another channel. The following morning, Alara was summoned once again to Administrator Malice's office. This time, only Director Karvanen was present, reviewing documents on her tablet with the focused intensity of someone making final decisions. Dr. Trent, she greeted without looking up. I understand you've been conducting additional research into the consortium's historical data. Alara hesitated, momentarily thrown by the director's knowledge of her late-night archive session. I was gathering context for your proposal, and accessing classified materials in the process. Karvanen finally looked up, her expression unreadable. Under normal circumstances, that would trigger automatic security protocols. The Teresh mining colony incident is directly relevant to your proposed program, Alara said, deciding that directness was her best strategy. The parallels are obvious, as are the potential risks. Risks we've spent 50 years studying and mitigating, Karvanen countered smoothly. The Teresh failure provided valuable data on what not to do. Your success with Kale has provided the missing piece, a template for successful bonding. A template that can't be rushed or forced, Alara insisted. What happened between Kale and me took time, genuine connection, and choice on both sides. Your 6-week integration timeline is dangerously accelerated. Karvanen studied her for a long moment, then set down her tablet with deliberate care. Your concern is noted, Dr. Trent, and, in fact, aligns with certain voices within the committee, which is why I'm prepared to offer you direct oversight of the program's development phase. Oversight, Alara echoed, suspicious of the sudden concession. Full methodological control, subject to basic security parameters. You would design the bonding protocols, select the human candidates, and establish the ethical framework for the program. Karvanen's voice remained neutral, but her eyes held calculated intensity. Rather than opposing the inevitable, you could shape it. The offer was tempting, far more than Alara wanted to admit. The chance to ensure the program developed with proper ethical guardrails, to prevent the mistakes that had led to the Teresh disaster. It was exactly what she'd hoped for, presented almost too conveniently. And Kale? She asked, watching Karvanen's reaction carefully. What would his role be? The first of a new classification, Alpha Vorak, a template and training assistant for the program. He would remain under your direct supervision, of course. Something in Karvanen's too smooth assurances triggered Alara's suspicions. I'd need time to consider the specifics, to draft preliminary protocols that would address my concerns. Of course, Karvanen agreed readily. Take the rest of the day. We'll reconvene tomorrow to finalize arrangements. She rose, gathering her materials. I'm pleased we could find common ground. Dr. Trent, this partnership has the potential to revolutionize frontier security. After Karvanen departed, Alara remained seated, turning the conversation over in her mind. The offer was exactly what she'd hoped for. Too precisely what she'd hoped for. Given her conversation with Wren in what should have been a secure archive, she returned to the lab to find Dr. Renvesser waiting for her. His crystalline features set in the Zephian equivalent of grim determination. They offered you control of the program, he stated, rather than asked. How did you know? Because it's what I would do, facing a potential ethical whistleblower with unique expertise. Wren moved closer, lowering his voice despite the lab's supposedly secure environment. They monitored our conversation in the archives. The security logs show an unauthorized access to the surveillance system at precisely the time we were discussing strategy. Alara felt a chill run through her. So they preempted our concerns by offering exactly what we wanted. A classic containment strategy, Wren agreed. Incorporate the opposition into the program, where they can be monitored and controlled. I need to check on Kale, Alara said suddenly, a new worry forming. She moved quickly to the observation area, Wren following close behind. The chamber was empty. Security override initiated at 0730 hours. The automated system informed her when she demanded an explanation. Subject transferred to specialized containment unit on director's authority. They've already moved him, Alara breathed, a mixture of rage and fear flooding her system. Where is this specialized containment unit? That information is restricted to authorized personnel, the system replied blandly. Wren placed a hand on her arm. They're accelerating their timeline, using Kale as leverage to ensure your cooperation. Alara's mind raced, calculating options. Direct confrontation would likely fail. Karvanen clearly had authority that superseded station protocols. But there were other ways to locate Kale. The tracking implant, she murmured, moving to her private terminal. The one we installed after the pirate incident. It operates on an independent frequency from the station's main systems. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, accessing a program she'd developed specifically to monitor Kale's vital signs and location. For a heart-stopping moment, the system returned no signal. Then, a single blip appeared on the schematic, not in any of the station's standard containment areas, but in the lower level, near the auxiliary docking bay. They're preparing to transport him off station, Wren observed, studying the schematic. Probably to their main research facility in the Centauri sector. Without completing the bonding documentation or transfer protocols, Alara added, already moving toward the door. They never intended to give me oversight, just to keep me distracted while they secured Kale. What are you planning? Wren called after her. To remind them why separating bonded pairs is a catastrophically bad idea. The auxiliary docking bay was officially designated for emergency vessels and short-range shuttles. As Alara approached through service corridors, avoiding main throughways where she might be intercepted, she noted increased security presence, consortium guards rather than station personnel, their uniforms bearing the distinctive insignia of the Special Projects Division. From her vantage point in the maintenance access tunnel, she could see a reinforced transport container being loaded onto a sleek shuttle. The container's specifications were familiar, designed for Class A dangerous specimens, with neural inhibitor fields to prevent the occupant from accessing their full physical capabilities. Kale was inside that container, likely sedated, but still conscious enough to be aware of his surroundings. The thought of him confined, separated from her without explanation, sent a wave of cold fury through Ilara. Inspector Neer was supervising the loading process, his crystalline form distinctive among the human security personnel. Director Karvanen stood nearby, conversing with a shuttle pilot. Their body language suggested urgency. This wasn't a scheduled transport but a hastily arranged extraction. Alara's options were limited. Direct intervention would likely result in her immediate detention. The consortium guards were armed with neural disruptors, designed to incapacitate without causing permanent damage. Even if she could somehow reach Kale's container, she had no way to open it without authorization codes. But there was one thing she did have: the unique bond that the consortium was so eager to study and replicate. Retreating deeper into the maintenance tunnel, Alara accessed her comm unit, switching to the specific frequency she'd established for Kale's tracking implant. The device wasn't designed for two-way communication, but she had modified it to include a simple signal function, originally intended as a recall mechanism during controlled outdoor exercises. She activated the signal, a specific pattern of pulses that Kale had been trained to associate with her presence, and a command to return to the main laboratory. It was a long shot. The neural inhibitors in the transport container might block the signal entirely, but it was the only option available. For long moments, nothing happened. The loading process continued methodically, security personnel moving with the practiced efficiency of those accustomed to dangerous cargo. Then, a subtle shift occurred. The transport container trembled slightly, the movement so minimal that only someone watching specifically for it would notice. A security technician approached, checking the external monitoring panel with a puzzled expression. "Elevated neural activity," Alara heard him report to Inspector Neer. "The sedation is holding, but there's increased response in the frontal cortex." Neer moved to examine the readings himself. "Impossible. The inhibitor field should be suppressing all higher functions." Alara continued the signal, increasing its intensity. In the laboratory, Kyle had demonstrated remarkable resistance to standard sedatives, metabolizing them faster than any recorded Vorak specimen. If even a fraction of his consciousness was accessible, he might recognize the familiar pattern. The container shuddered more visibly now, causing the loading team to step back in alarm. Warning lights flashed on the external panel, indicating rising biological readings across all metrics. "Increase the inhibitor field," Nair ordered sharply. "Prepare additional sedatives." Before the technician could comply, a sound emerged from the container, a deep, resonant growl that penetrated even the reinforced walls, causing vibrations to ripple through the docking bay floor. It wasn't a sound of pain or confusion, but of focused rage, the hunting call of a Vorak that had identified its prey. The security team's disciplined formation faltered. Several reached for their weapons, training them on the container with obvious nervousness. Director Karvanen strode forward, her expression tight with controlled anger. "Stabilize it," she commanded. "We have 3 minutes until departure clearance." The container's exterior began to distort, subtle at first, then more pronounced as pressure built from within. Metal strained against forces it had never been designed to contain. The inhibitor field's control panel sparked and died, plunging that section of the bay into momentary darkness. "Evacuate non-essential personnel," Neer ordered, his crystalline voice cutting through the growing chaos. "Activate emergency containment protocols." The docking bay's alarm system blared to life, blast doors beginning their ponderous descent to isolate the area. Alara knew she had seconds to make her move before being sealed away from the unfolding situation. Emerging from the maintenance tunnel, she strode directly toward the container, ignoring the shouts of security personnel. Her lab credentials still functioned. The consortium hadn't had time to revoke her access, allowing her to bypass the initial security barrier. "Dr. Trent!" Karvanen's voice cut through the alarm klaxons. "Stand down immediately!" Alara ignored her, continuing toward the straining container. Security personnel moved to intercept her. Neural disruptors raised. "Hold your fire!" Nier countermanded suddenly, faceted eyes fixed on the container's buckling exterior. "She may be our only chance to prevent catastrophic containment failure." The security team hesitated, caught between conflicting orders. In that moment of indecision, Alara reached the container's external control panel. The standard interface was offline, but the emergency manual release remained, a physical mechanism designed as a last resort in case of system failure. "Kale!" she called, her voice cutting through the cacophony of alarms. "Status green. Stand down." The pressure against the container's walls ceased abruptly. The growling stopped, replaced by an expectant silence that seemed almost more unnerving to the watching security team. Alara operated the manual release, disengaging the primary locks. The container's door slid partially open, then jammed, damaged by the internal pressure. From the shadowed interior, Kale's black eyes gleamed, focusing immediately on Alara's face. "Easy," she murmured, maintaining the calm, steady tone that had become their private language. "We're going back to the lab. Together." For a tense moment, Kale remained motionless, his massive form coiled with lethal potential. Then, with deliberate control, he extracted himself from the damaged container, 6 limbs moving with fluid grace, despite the lingering effects of the sedatives. The security team backed away, weapons still raised but no one daring to fire. Kyle positioned himself beside Alara, a low rumble vibrating from his chest, not threatening, but clearly communicative. His meaning was unmistakable to everyone present. He would follow Alara, and anyone attempting to prevent this would face consequences. Director Karvanen stepped forward, her composure remarkably intact despite the situation. "This demonstration only confirms the exceptional nature of your bond, Dr. Trent. All the more reason for the consortium to study and replicate it." "What it demonstrates," Alara replied evenly, "is that you can't separate us against our will without consequences. Kale isn't cargo to be shipped, and I'm not a resource to be managed. We're partners. A partnership that could save countless lives if properly implemented across frontier colonies," Karvanen countered. "Your personal attachment shouldn't outweigh the greater good." "My personal attachment is precisely what makes this work," Alara said, her hand resting lightly on Kale's scarred flank. "You can't engineer it, accelerate it, or force it. What you can do is work with us to understand it properly." Inspector Nier had been quietly analyzing the situation, his crystalline features refracting the emergency lights in complex patterns. Now, he addressed Karvanen directly. "The Teresh protocols failed because they attempted to simulate what must develop naturally. Perhaps Dr. Trent's methodology merits more thorough consideration." A tense silence fell as Karvanen weighed her options. The failed extraction had created a diplomatic situation. Using force now would likely result in exactly the kind of incident the consortium was desperate to avoid, especially with witnesses present. "A compromise. Then," she said finally, "you and your partner remain at this facility. The program proceeds with your input, but under consortium supervision. Both sides maintain leverage. And no more unauthorized transfers," Alara added firmly. "Any future research involving Kale requires my explicit consent and presence." "Agreed," Karvanen conceded, though her expression suggested this was merely a strategic retreat rather than a true capitulation. "We'll draw up the revised protocols immediately." As security personnel began managing the aftermath of the near disaster, Alara led Kale back toward the main laboratory complex. His movements were still slightly sluggish from the sedatives, but his awareness was sharp, black eyes constantly scanning for potential threats. "They won't give up," Dr. Renvesser observed, falling into step beside them as they reached the main corridor. "They'll simply adjust their approach." "I know," Alara acknowledged, "but we've established boundaries."
And more importantly, she glanced at Kyle, who walked beside her with predatory grace despite his recent confinement. We've demonstrated why those boundaries matter. In the weeks that followed, an uneasy cooperation emerged between Alara's research team and the consortium representatives. The program proceeded, but with significant modifications to the original timeline and methodology. Rather than rushed bonding protocols, Alara insisted on careful candidate selection and natural interaction periods. Rather than treating Vorak as weapons to be deployed, the revised approach emphasized partnership and mutual benefit. The results were mixed but promising. Not every human-Vorak pairing developed the profound bond that Alara shared with Kale, but those that did showed remarkable stability and effectiveness. More importantly, the failures were identified early, before they could escalate into dangerous situations. 6 months after the docking bay incident, Alara stood in the expanded observation area, watching as 3 bonded pairs navigated a complex training scenario. Each human Vorak team demonstrated unique dynamics, some more protective, others more strategic, but all showed the core elements of mutual trust and communication that had defined her relationship with Kale. Progress report. Dr. Trent? Director Karvanen had remained on station as the consortium's primary representative, her initial antagonism gradually evolving into grudging respect. Promising, Alara replied, gesturing toward the training area, where a female scientist was demonstrating remarkable coordination with her Vorak partner. Especially Liu and Mara. Their communication development is approaching our established benchmarks. Timeline estimates for deployment readiness? That terminology isn't helpful, Alara reminded her, for perhaps the 100th time. They're not weapons to be deployed. They're sentient partnerships that may choose to assist in security operations. Karvanen sighed, a hint of her old impatience surfacing. Semantics aside, when will they be ready for field testing? Another 3 months, minimum. The bond needs to be tested under controlled stress conditions before any frontier posting could be considered. Their discussion was interrupted by Kale's arrival, no longer confined to specific areas. He moved freely throughout the expanded research complex, his presence both a symbol of the program's potential and a reminder of its inherent risks. He approached Alara, nudging her shoulder with familiar gentleness before settling beside her. Black eyes fixed on the training scenario below. Still remarkable, Karvanen murmured, watching their interaction. After all this time, the depth of connection. Not connection, Alara corrected quietly. Understanding. We each made choices that brought us here. That's what your protocols need to preserve. The element of choice on both sides. As if understanding her words, Kale rumbled his agreement, the sound vibrating through the observation deck, below. The training pairs continued their exercises, moving with increasing synchronization, human empathy, and predatory instinct finding harmony in shared purpose. The galaxy was changing. Word of the program had spread despite the consortium's attempts at secrecy, sparking debates across academic and military circles. Some hailed it as the dawn of a new security paradigm. Others warned of catastrophic ethical implications. Pirates and traffickers adjusted their strategies, suddenly wary of frontier outposts that might house bonded Vorak guardians. For Alara, the philosophical debates remained secondary to the daily reality of her work and of her bond with Kale. What had begun as an impulsive rescue had evolved into something unprecedented, a partnership that transcended species barriers and challenged fundamental assumptions about predator and prey, guardian and protected. That evening, as Kithar Prime's twin moons cast their purple light across the research complex, Alara stood on the observation platform overlooking the external exercise yard. Kale moved through the space below, his powerful form executing training maneuvers with fluid precision. I saved him from a collapsing pit, she mused to Dr. Renvesser, who had joined her for their now routine evening analysis session. He saved us from death. Now, we stand on the brink of something neither of us fully understands.
Yet you proceed anyway, Ren observed, his tone neither judgmental nor approving, simply acknowledging the reality they faced.
Because the alternative is worse, Alara replied. If we don't guide this process, someone else will, without the ethical frameworks we've established.
Kale paused in his exercises, head tilting as he caught their voices. His black eyes found Alara's, reflecting the moonlight in pools of midnight. In that silent exchange lay the truth that all their research sought to understand. A connection formed not through protocol or design, but through the simplest and most profound of actions. Mercy offered when none was expected. Loyalty given when none was demanded. As Kale resumed his movements below, Alara's comm unit chimed with an incoming alert. Suspicious trafficking vessel detected in Sector 7G. A familiar scenario, one that had played out multiple times since their partnership began. Without hesitation, she tapped her communicator.
Kale, she said simply.
Suit up. The response was immediate. Kale moved toward the preparation chamber, where his specialized armor awaited. As Alara watched him position himself for the automated system to attach the protective plates, she reflected on their journey together. They had become something the galaxy had never anticipated. Not researcher and subject, not even partners in the conventional sense, but something new, a symbiosis that combined the best elements of both species. Human empathy had transformed a monster into a guardian. Predatory instinct had given Mercy its fangs. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them, as they had faced all others, together. A living testament to the power of unlikely bonds, forged in the crucible of choice and trust. The universe would adapt to this new reality, just as they had adapted to each other. And perhaps, in that adaptation, find wisdom that transcended the old divisions between predator and prey, protector and protected, revealing the profound truth that mercy, offered freely, could transform even the most dangerous force into something miraculous, a guardian bound by choice rather than instinct, killing without hesitation for the human who had freed it from darkness.